Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the session on AI and governance, the next decade of digital public infrastructure. Digital public infrastructure is recognized as the agent for catalyzing large-scale socio-economic transformation across low and middle-income countries and beyond. Under India's G20 presidency in 2023, DPIs were collectively endorsed as accelerators for SDGs 2030. The next decade is bound to see a rapid proliferation of DPIs in developing and developed economies alike, with the recently endorsed definition detailed principles for guiding the development and deployment of DPIs. Moreover, the recent technological advancement in AI significantly augment the potential of DPIs to transform citizens' lives by enabling public service delivery and citizen government engagements and building a robust open innovation ecosystem. To take the session forward, we would like to first begin with the virtual keynote address from Mr. Amitabh Kant. Mr. Amitabh Kant is India's G20 Sherpa. Mr. Kant is a governance reformer and a public policy change agent for India, having driven key reforms and initiatives during his tenure as the CEO of the NITI Aayog and the Secretary of the Department of Industrial Policy and Promotion, Government of India.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here at the Global Partnership on AI Summit to address you on DPI and AI, the next decade of DPIs. Let me begin my speech by giving you a brief overview of India's tryst with technology in the form of digital public infrastructure over the last decade. Envision India's digital transformation as a masterful painting where each stroke is a deliberate and thoughtful contribution towards a grand portrait of inclusive growth. In this endeavor, the government's intervention are the foundational brushstrokes laying the groundwork for a vibrant and equitable economic landscape. The private sector's innovation adds depth and texture to the painting, introducing bold colors and dynamic elements that bring the canvas to life with creativity and ingenuity. Meanwhile, the engagement of citizen acts as the final touches of detail, infusing the scene with the richness of public participation and the voice of collective many voices. Together, these elements blend seamlessly on the canvas, creating a masterpiece that depicts not just economic progress, but a balanced and inclusive society where every stroke, every color contributes to the overall beauty and harmony of the piece. The painting, rich in layers and meaning, is a testament to how government policy, private sector dynamism, and citizen involvement can collaborate to craft a narrative of inclusive growth and shared prosperity. Today, India is the world's largest digitally connected democracy with over 830 million internet users from over 700 districts that have 5G services. It has over 1.2 billion mobile subscribers, of which about 750 million are smartphone users. We are estimated to have 1 billion smartphone users by 2026. India stands at the forefront of the global digital payments revolution, with a staggering 46% of the world's digital transactions pulsating through its economy. Looking ahead, even the most cautious projections paint a picture of exponential growth. By 2025, unified payment interface transactions will skyrocket to an astounding 1 billion per day. This surge will capture 90% of the nation's retail payments, firmly establishing India as a titan in the world of digital commerce. Our citizens now hold a digital key to their life's digital world with the DigiLocker. In this virtual realm, 160 million users glide through the exchange of over 5.6 billion documents originating from a vast network of over 2,300 issuers. India's data empowerment and protection architecture brings a cutting-edge fusion of technology and law, transforming how individuals exercise their data rights. This pioneering system, rooted in consent-based data sharing, is empowering over 1.1 billion accounts with the seamless sharing of crucial data across banking, securities, insurance, and pension sectors. The Indian digital transformation march is being led by a thriving ecosystem of over 110,000 startups. Among them are a phenomenal 115 dazzling unicorns which have magnetized an impressive 99 billion in funding. Together they form a formidable constellation valued at around $347 billion, showcasing the vibrant entrepreneurial spirit of India. Over the last couple of years, we've embarked upon ushering in a new era of e-commerce, characterized by inclusivity and universal access. The launch of the Open Network for Digital Commerce, ONDC, is a game changer, leveling the playing field for small and medium-sized merchants. This groundbreaking network will surely broaden access and augment choice and quality of service for consumers, while simultaneously fostering competition and efficiency throughout the entire value chain. When these paint strokes combine, they demonstrate the extraordinary canvas that is India's digital public infrastructure, the DPIs. The DPIs transcend the realm of mere technology. It's a lighthouse guiding us towards advancement and empowerment. It's catalyzing innovation and sharpening competitive edges for the benefit of consumers while adhering to the principles of accountability and transparency. Let's not forget that it was DPI's robust and adaptable building blocks that played a pivotal role in the historic endeavor, administering an impressive 2 billion vaccines just over 2 years, setting a new gold standard in public health response. Ladies and gentlemen, as I look back on this extraordinary decade of India's digital metamorphosis, I'm filled with a deep sense of assurance. I'm confident that the digital public infrastructure stands as a monumental milestone. Future generations will undoubtedly recognize it as a pivotal intervention that played a key role in launching India into the global stage as a mighty force marked by empowered citizens and thriving enterprises. Allow me now to turn our attention towards a new horizon that is ready to encompass our world, the revolutionary realm of artificial intelligence. AI brings with it the potential to boost the global economy by $15 trillion by 2030 and the Indian economy by a staggering $1 trillion by 2035. India is blessed with a wealth of data, a robust AI workforce, and a transformational stack of digital public infrastructure, which is perfectly poised to capitalize on AI. I firmly believe that the enchantment and the enhancement of our digital public infrastructure with AI will serve as a global benchmark. Drawing inspiration from our successful DPI ecosystem, we can develop a flourishing, open, reliable, transparent, and trusted AI future. A future where the intelligence of this frontier technology is a public good. Let me lay down 4 streams of thought that I think will enable this enhancement. Firstly, we need to establish a robust foundation which provides a pivot to transition into this new era. Our foremost objective ought to be the creation of a facilitative ecosystem, ensuring access to cost-effective compute infrastructure, diverse and representative data sets, and the expertise necessary for the development of advanced algorithms. We must support various participants, technological frameworks, and solutions developed by different entities. The goal should be to design a merger of AI with DPI such that it encourages collaboration and integration rather than functioning in isolation. Secondly, we need to empower varied ecosystem partners, including technologists, civil society groups, and most importantly, users. It's vital to enable ecosystem partners to take ownership and actively contribute to the success of this ecosystem. Nandan Nilekani has a fascinating take on this thread where he has recently argued that we need to shift away from the pervasive fight of our times to build the largest AI models. Instead, he argues, we need to focus upon building use case oriented, open and accessible small models which are available for the entire community. This is a novel approach. I'm sure we'll see many such ideas rise in India soon for the benefit of the global community. Ideas that focus upon openness, affordability, and accessibility, along with the unbounded possibilities of artificial intelligence. Thirdly, with the merger of AI and DPI, we have with us the possibility of unleashing technology with personalization, which we must relentlessly focus upon. Our approach must be on using technology to address the diverse needs of users, offering tailored solutions in education, healthcare, skilling, and so on. We have begun this mission with the Jugalbandi application, which is a free and open platform that combines the power of large language models and the Government of India's language translation model Bhashan to power conversational AI solutions. Language will no longer be a barrier to accessing information. Jugalbandi is empowering citizens to access information about government schemes, healthcare benefits, and a justice system in a language of their choice. This is a transformative application of AI with personalization, and I'm confident that it's the first amongst many. Finally, let me close my speech by doing a bit of self-introspection on behalf of policymakers. In this new AI era, we need agile public policy. As we venture into new territories with AI, it is essential to acknowledge that traditional regulatory frameworks might not be sufficient. We need to evolve our public policies to reflect the transformative nature of AI. Policies which advance innovation for public good while embedding strong guardrails to mitigate its risks. Forums such as this are pivotal opportunities to learn from the best minds across the globe. As I look forward to learning the outcomes of this summit, I encourage policymakers across the world to rise to the occasion. In this new AI era, we need agile public policy. As we venture into new territories with AI, it is essential to acknowledge that traditional regulatory frameworks might not be sufficient. We need to evolve our public policies to reflect the transformative nature of AI. Policies that advance innovation for public good while embedding strong guardrails to mitigate its risks. Forums such as this are pivotal opportunities to learn from the best minds across the globe. As I look forward to learning the outcomes of this summit, I encourage policymakers across the world to rise to the occasion. We need to become hyper-vigilant to stay cognizant of the opportunities and challenges that we need to build and navigate a responsible and trustworthy future. Thank you for joining me at this very crucial forum. The future is ours to shape, and the time to act is now.
We thank Mr. Amitabh Kant for his virtual address. To take this session forward, I'd like to invite Mr. Sharad Sharma. Sharad, you could come on to the stage. Mr. Sharad Sharma is a co-founder of iceberg Foundation, a non-technology think tank known for conceptualizing India Stack, Health Stack, and other digital public goods. He chairs the IFSCA's Expert Committee on Asset Tokenization and the Task Force on DPI within the Think Tank 20 group of G20. Next speaker, we have Ms. Sharmishta Appaya. Sharmishta Appaya, as the global lead digital data infrastructure, leads the digital data infrastructure business line working on DPI and data-driven innovations. Sharmishta's previous experience includes fintech and technology-related developments on financial inclusion. Our third speaker is Mr. Jordan Sandman. Jordan Sandman is principal on the investment team at Co-Develop and an honorary research fellow at the University College London's Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose. He helps develop and execute Co-Develop's grant-making strategy and conduct research to support the deployment of safe, inclusive digital public infrastructure in countries across the world. Our next speaker is Ms. Kamya Chandra. Kanya Chandra is Chief Strategy Officer at the Global Center for Digital Public Infrastructure, working to guide countries in the design and implementation of digital public infrastructure to power financial inclusion, access to health and education, and economic growth via verifiable identifiers, payments, data sharing, discovery protocols, and trust infrastructure. Next, we have Mr. Tanuj Bhojwani. Tanuj Bhojwani is the head of People Plus AI. As a fellow at iSpoet Foundation, Tanuj worked on policy issues related to digital identity, payments, data protection, and drones. He's also the co-author of The Art of Blissfulness, Keeping Calm in the Digital World with Nandini Lekani. Then we have a moderator for the session, Mr. Rudra Chaudhary. He's the director of Carnegie India. His research focuses on the diplomatic history of South Asia, an important role of emerging technologies and DPI in diplomacy and development. Thank you.
All right, Swati, thanks so much. It's great to be here. It's great that we can dispense from the introductions. We've got a really fantastic panel over here to discuss, I think, two very loaded terms, DPI and very powerful terms, DPI and AI. As the Sherpa made very clear, we're now looking at a world where it's about merger, collaboration, the creation of a new ecosystem. So I think what we may want to do over the next hour or so, and I think we have just about an hour, is to try and unpack this merger, right? And talk a little bit about, so there's DPI and AI, there's DPI, there's AI in DPI, there's AI for DPI. There are many different ways in which you can cut this, and I think there are some very tangible ways in which the two actually have already actually come together, but that can be augmented further. But beyond that, I think it's also an opportunity with the fantastic kind of panel that you have. You know, we've got essentially architects and visionaries. We've got international organizations. We've got people who've been disrupting this entire space for a very long time. I'm looking at Tanuj and Kamya over here, building collaborations around the world. And we've got people who actually have the money and they fund this stuff, right? So talk a little bit also about the future of DPI. So what I want to do is kind of come to each one of you in unpacking these two taxonomies, if you like. But perhaps end the conversation also, you can do this, you can think about this over the next sort of 30, 40 minutes. Kind of come to a conclusion to say that, if you were sitting here 3 years from now, what would this ecosystem look like, right? And maybe that gives us a kind of a vision and a pathway forward. So perhaps maybe I could start with you, Sharad. You've kind of been in this space for a very long time. You've built this space for us in many ways, right? And we're chewing off a lot of what you have architected with many others. Think about AI in for DPI. What does that mean to you?
AI and DPI will marry in two ways. One is DPI for AI, and second is AI for DPI. They are about as different as they can be. They're not the same, right? So we got to make a distinction between the two. And I'm hoping that we'll unpack that so that everybody in the audience can see the difference between the two terms. DPI for AI is to make AI successful. Now, what is successful AI? One of the stories of India has been that much of what we have done can have a dystopian view and a utopian view. So, for example, identity, there is a dystopian view of identity that it can be used for surveillance, and government will know everything that you are doing. The dystopian view of identity in the West is that Google and Apple and Facebook know everything that you're doing, right? And because they essentially give you federated ID that you use today. The utopian view of identity is that the citizen is empowered, but it does not change the balance or the relationship with either the state or with big companies in an unfavorable fashion. Are you with me so far? Right? So AI is also has a dystopian view of AI. And the country that should worry most about the dystopian view is India. Because how will that dystopian view manifest itself? It will manifest itself in deep fakes, which will shape the political process. It will manifest itself in pornography becoming more addictive. It will manifest itself in gaming becoming more addictive. Distractions essentially becoming more addictive, right? Which country has the largest population of young people? India. And if we lose that young population to distractive AI, if India would lose its young people, you can be sure other young people in the world are lost as well. So we would lose a generation in this dialogue. Now, this is not very far. I can name seasoned professors in the US who would say there is a young generation which has been lost to TikTok and Instagram and social media in the Western world. And the first use case for AI has been social media. That is now coming at a scale and ferocity that we haven't seen before. So we have to prevent a dystopian view where elections are at risk, human potential is at risk as we go forward. And then, of course, there is the utopian view, which is that it can give us super teachers, it can give us super nurses, super doctors, and so on and so forth. Now, in shaping which of these two views will emerge, I think that ecosystem will matter, and what we have learnt in India to create an ecosystem, creating the digital public infrastructure for that matters. So the DPI for AI, and more precisely DPI for data, which is called DEPA, is going to be instrumental in shaping what kind of AI you and I consume in India as we go forward. Because that will shape not only regulation, it will also shape innovation. And in a later go around, I'll make it tangible for you. Because the success of all the DPIs that is there is this, for financial inclusion at least, is this little lady that Sanjay Jain helped us conceive. Does anybody here know the name? I'm not going to ask my friends on the left to side because if they don't know, then heaven forbid. But does anybody know? Raji, who said that? Yes, it is Rajini. So it was the use case that was described for Rajini in 2013, which is that can we bring her into the formal system for intraday lending, has not been met yet. Because we can make quarterly cash flow loans to her profitable that the market can get into them. But we have not yet at a point where we can make monthly cash flow loans profitable that the market can get into them, let alone daily loans profitable that we can get to them. That is still an unfinished agenda which will take 2-3 years to reach. And for that, something called NFIR, PCR, all that has to come to life. So all I'm saying is DPIs have been constructed around very, very well understood problems that have been there. So somewhere as we go, we'll talk about what is the AI problem that the Indian DPI for AI is going to solve. Does anybody know what that problem is? No. We'll do a role play if he gives me a chance to come back. And we'll crystallize that problem so that you know what that problem is. I will leave it here and I'll let Tanuj and Kamya and others talk about AI and DPI. They'll do a better job than I can.
Okay, Sharad, but before I let you go, I just want to take, and let's just be very honest in this room. Clearly, it's not an off-the-record discussion. I think it's on camera. But how many of you know what DEPA is? Just so that we get our principles right as we, okay, so about 15% of the room. So, Sharad, with that, why don't you just unpack DEPA for us? Because the logic you're talking about requires at least this audience to understand what this kind of DPI is.
Tanuj knows this, and I can't resist this. The book that he and Nandan were supposed to write was on what, Tanuj?
It was on privacy. It was,
on data and privacy, right? And what it ended up being a better book, perhaps you should read it and tell me where it was. But it did move away from the topic it was supposed to cover. Had that book been written on the original topic, it wouldn't have been 15%.
That I'm not sure, but
yeah,
just unpack DEPA for us.
But, you know, this real story is very, very simple. You know, this is all related to AI. AI has two parts. It has a building part and a using part, right? When all of you here use ChatGPT, that's not the building part, that's the using part. And for the using part, you submit to something like ChatGPT or an AI system that a doctor may be using or a lender may be using. You submit to it personal data. That personal data, when you give, you want to make sure is not misused by the person on the other side. That personal data sharing that you do out of choice, right? You choose to share your personal data. Nobody has forced you to do that. in return for something personalized back in return, right? It's a loan, personalized medicine, personalized, inference as to what's wrong with you. It could be anything, and personalized recommendation on a video. All that you get back in return means that after that transaction is done, that data that you provided should not be misused after that. So it should be purpose limited, it should be storage limited. That cycle is called the inference cycle, right? That is the usage of AI cycle. India set out to build that inference cycle first, and that was then deployed as the account aggregator system. Many of you know in the financial world. How many of you know of the account aggregator system? And since that system has worked largely, it has worked actually very well, the DPDP Act has now extended that system to all sectors in India. So that's one part of preserving privacy for the inference cycle, for the use of personal data in the inference cycle. But back in time, we knew that we didn't want to be just consumers of AI. Left to ourselves, what is the likely outcome? We'll just be consumers of AI. Because the Americans and the Chinese will love it if India has no AI capability of its own and we merely consume their AI. Is it not? Right? So you need to build a system where we are good at building AI. Building AI requires training data sets. So now the question is, how do you unlock training data sets? Today, the training data sets systems are available only in the US, which I'll do a role play with you if I get a chance later, and explain why it can't be implemented in India. Or in 2022, China built a system that is there. Europe could have built it with the EU AI Act, but missed this opportunity, unfortunately, or last Thursday. And so therefore, you have only 4 places of continental data sets. 2 are already unlocked and 2 remain to be unlocked. The India way of unlocking continental data sets for training models so that Indian companies can create world-class models out of India is what is going to be enabled by DPA training cycle. Both of which are part of the same DPI. DPI is called DPA. One part is for consumption of AI, the other part is for production of AI. The part that is there for production of AI is rolling out. If some of you, did anybody attend Dr. Ajay Sood's remarks in the morning, the principal scientific advisor, right? You heard him talk about it. So it's now official, it is rolling out, but there are 2 ways to roll it out. One is the ONDC mode, where you create the hype and then everybody gets in. Second is you create the facts on the ground and then you create the hype. So DPA training is going for the second approach rather than for the first approach, because that's probably the better thing to do in this situation.
Okay, thanks, Sharad. If I can just move to Kamya for a second, it seems to me is that if you've got DPI on one side of the bridge and you've got AI on the other, the bridge is trust, right? And that's something that we're going to need a lot now, in fact, not even kind of in the future. Can you just give us your sense of how you unpack these kind of dichotomies? They're not really dichotomies, but they're, and how does trust play a key role in this entire process?
Yeah, so I think, building on what was said earlier, I think DPI and AI are 2 big buzzwords, right? So in some sense, this is a panel of stitching together 2 buzzwords. And Amitabh Kant, sir, earlier had mentioned on the screen, it's a merger. And I actually don't think it's a merger, because DPI as an approach has been built to allow for AI in some sense. It's not like you now have to go back, like in a complex M&A, you have to go back and stitch together, 2 very difficult and new cousins or, entities. So, for example, if the way we think about how we use UPI, right? UPI as a protocol was written back in 2015 almost, and it didn't have to change a single line of the UPI protocol for it to allow CBDC as a new technology, right, to be included as a potential asset type or a currency type. It didn't have to change anything to include an AI layer on top, which allowed for something called Hello UPI, which will basically allow you to say, "Mujhe 5 rupees bhejne hain mere cousin Deepa ko," and the AI-based language model will then translate your instruction and allow you to access that service without, again, a single change to the UPI protocol, right? And why is that the case? It's because DPI is built to account for changes in technology in the future, and it's built to account for, let's say, credit underwriting models. Why would AI models be any different, right? So in that sense, they're just more sophisticated models, but a model is a model is a model. So I think if we think about the way in which these two things will blend together in the future, I think DPI, as very well said in last week, your conference as well, Rudra, that Nandan mentioned, DPI is an exponent in some sense on AI, because without digital infrastructure, what ends up happening is the entities with the most data are able to do the most with AI, right? So like the winners in that ecosystem would have been Google, Amazon, no doubt about it, because they have the most data on you, so they can build the most sophisticated models, which means they also can win that race. But I think what DPI does is, in some sense, it rebalances that equation, because now suddenly no one big tech is bigger than all of UPI, right? No one big tech is bigger than a data sharing framework like DEPA or the account aggregator ecosystem or DigiLocker, right, which is a mechanism through open APIs. So because DPI is an approach more than a set of systems, it ends up accounting for AI and also ensuring that AI is able to grow in an inclusive manner that brings along, all of India. And I think there's some tenets in DPI, such as, relying on digital signatures for trust, which are super critical, in a world that's shaped by AI in the future. Tomorrow you want to know if when BBC has put out a post, is it actually BBC or has it been, manipulated with? And the way you'll know that is if BBC starts digitally signing its tweets, right? Or digitally signing its news articles, so that it's not a cropped, remade sort of article. So I think there are a lot of elements of DPI thinking, DPI as an approach, not just DPI as a set of nouns of systems, right? That actually translate extremely well into an AI world, because it's built to be future-proof, and vice versa, I think.
So we'll come back to the question of future-proof, because I just wonder if we're assuming it's future-proof, but we don't really know what the future is when it comes to AI. So we'll come to those inflection points. And we'll come back, perhaps, Kamya, I'll come back to this question about, so a lot of the discussion around AI today in the development area is around equitable access, right? And we've just kind of, we've been for all these roundtables at GPAI where there's a very strong voice from the Global South saying is that, listen, it's not harms, it's opportunities, access, skilling, labor force, etc., right? And I think what you're saying is that, look, what DPI has done in many ways, it's created a, lack of a better term, a stable infrastructure, right? So you can put tapes on top and it doesn't really rattle the bottom as much, right? And we can try and build on that. But in order to keep this infrastructure going, and if I can bring in Tanuj, is that we're just going to need hardware, right? There's a big argument about equitable access, compute. There's obviously a very strong, I hate the terms, but the global north view that you just do this LLM, right? You just keep buying this stuff, you keep kind of pushing compute power, you build larger models, and that somehow or the other will trickle down to use cases, which will solve the world's problems, right? We seem to be in a different place. I know you've got a thesis, which is kind of an alternative thesis. Just unpack this, keeping the larger architecture of this conversation in mind.
Yeah. So you're right. The terms global north, global south don't do justice to what that real divide is, which is essentially in a society where most people have basic, right? So one way to put it is in India the demands were once for roti, kapda, makan. Then it was bijli, pani, sadak, right? Just for my friends not from India, that's food, clothing, shelter used to be demands. Then it became roads, water, and electricity, right? And today it's finally coming to health, education, climate, right? Like sort of as a population, the demand and the things that you ask for change, and therefore what your country invests in and builds change is also, right? So the governments, whereas in the US, and military dominance, will AI, if China has all the AI, where will that leave the US and US industry, etc.? And these are the concerns that policymakers are grappling with, whereas in India we're still, on the somewhere between the bijli, pani, sadak, the road, water, electricity, and the health, education, climate sort of, journey. And therefore we're going to look at things and technologies with a very different lens. I mean, that's just a fact, right? We are, after all is said and done, we will soon be the world's third largest economy, but on a per capita basis, we are still not, with the others in the top 5, right? So therefore, the way we look at these and look at these technologies is different. Now, Therefore, whereas in the US you want the race is to the holy grail of AGI, artificial general intelligence, intelligence that surpasses all of humanity in all tasks, right? And a model, and the company that wields that is just like the holy grail or like King Arthur's sword will end up ruling the kingdom, is the mythology there, right? Whereas in India we are still asking the question, hey, whatever you've built, how can that help people on the ground today? Right, and plug for what I do is a not-for-profit called People Plus AI, which tries to do the same thing, put the people first, shiny new toy later, right? Because shiny new toy keeps changing, right? Like, and that's what I think you were referring to the start of this, that yesterday it was DPI, today it's AI, but at the heart of it, the people's problems in the global south remain the same. So, therefore, our thesis, like Rudra asked this question, is that, hey, let's think use case first. Let's think, what do people need? What can existing technologies do today that can help them? And therefore, what is that achievable gap, right? What is that step that we can take, that if you have to develop something or do something, what's that step that we can take that makes solving this problem for everybody easier? And this approach is, in some parts, by doing building blocks, is what Kamya is calling DPI approach. And this, in the same way, is what we are saying for AI, is can we have, say, language models to just take away the English premium, right, in this country, or English tax, if you want to call it that. Is that there's so many better opportunities that get unlocked if you can speak like I do in this country, right? Or if you have a level of education or access or peers because of whom you got that access, right? 2016 in many ways, right, was a great equalizer, because once Geo came in, YouTube is now, I think, the world's largest university, right? There are great hip-hop artists in India now who are learning not by going to the hip-hop school of Bombay. They're learning on YouTube, right? And so technology, right, levels the playground very differently in a country like India versus elsewhere. Our thesis is that if we build use case first, we will know exactly what we need for data, we will know exactly what we need for models, and we'll know exactly what we need for compute. And we will also know how to regulate, in this context. But sort of trying to boil the ocean from the other end, where you go from technology first, and if we get to AGI, then these harms can happen, and this can go wrong. I think we'll spend a lot of time in those debates, but not actually helping people. One good framework, right, for us to ask is, for all of us, is to think about what is the cost of doing nothing, right? If you don't take this technology, and if you don't do something today, right? How many people today will not get a loan, will continue in the poverty trap? How many people will not get access to healthcare, not go there? And once you start looking at the numbers that way, right, I think your focus has to change, right? You don't want to get to the AGI race, you don't want to get in the fundamental race. I want to get in the race of helping people today, because it is possible. Somebody has to bridge the imagination between what just got invented and what people need. And that bridging is the bridging between DPI and AI, I think.
Okay, so I'm just going to pull it together before I come to two of our international organizations. So, I think Sharad's made a really strong point about, if you have to tangibly think about how do you make this merger happen, it's already happening, and DEPA is a really good example, right? And we take that path forward. I think Kamya's made a very powerful point on, if you think about AI, competition, monopolies, democratizing this space, which is a term that we use very loosely. If you follow the DPI framework, this marriage between markets, governance, and technology, right? So not just DPI, not just an artifact, but the actual framework, right? You possibly end up in a place where you're able to get the better AI, right? To use a kind of parochial term, than the bad AI, right? And you've got kind of trust built into this architecture. And it's almost like trust by code, right? So there's that strand. And the third strand that seems to be that, Tanuj, you've got a very clear point, which is that, listen, where the DPI AI connect kind of comes together in a way, if you're thoughtful as a country, as a national strategy, is to think from the bottom rather than the top. So think about really what are those 5 or 10 problems that you're solving. Then you say, what is the data collection framework that you actually need? Then you say, what do you build this upon, right? Then do you create your own LLM? Do you build upon other LLMs? And there's a diplomacy piece there as well, right? So I'm going to come back on each, but have I got that generally correct? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So with that, if I could just move to, and Jordan, I've not forgotten you because you're on my right. But if I could maybe come to Sharmishta, right? If I look at the last, you've been doing DPI for a very long time at the bank, right? ID has been kind of a mantra for the bank for about a decade now, right? You guys have built an ecosystem. I'm guessing the G20 also had a transformative effect on the bank and its logic. You've got a new strand that you've invested in DPIs. Give us a sense about how you're thinking about the future of DPI. And can you unpack, is there a piece on the DPI AI algorithm that you'd like to unpack for us?
Thanks, Rita. So we have been doing a lot at the bank on digital ID as a whole. And I think that what the G20 did really usefully was the framing of DPI to include payments, to include digital ID, to include data sharing, and also to include trust services, which comes back to Kamya's point, which is, I think, one of the most powerful bridges between AI and DPI. Within the bank itself, we look at it as a whole infrastructure of digital transformation. So we start from the bottom layers of much more hard infrastructure. So compute power, what is the cloud environment, the data hosting strategies. But also in the countries that we work, it's really important for internet coverage, so connectivity being one of the first things that we start with, as well as things like electricity. So that being sort of the hard infrastructure, then we actually look at DPI as much more of the connectivity layer, so the connective tissue between that and, as Tanuj says, the use cases. So at the end goal of what we're looking at is the use cases. Can we use AI and data for credit infrastructure? Can we use it to create credit scoring? So that is the crux of what we do. So a large part of what we're looking at DPI and AI is productivity, inclusivity, and competition. So these are three main areas that we're focusing on. And AI can actually balance this in a number of different ways. And it tends to always take the path of least resistance. So it can have both the pros and cons on both of this. It can either increase productivity, or it can go the opposite way, that just sort of the first mover advantage and the first people win. So those are areas that is obviously a lot of importance to us, and something that we're doing quite a bit of work on to actually create an enabling environment in countries to actually support the movement into more productive areas, into not just access to a lot of these things, but actually usage. So we're seeing a lot of access in countries, but what we're not seeing is usage. And this is, financial inclusion realm as well. And then the last thing is on competition. So bringing the much more, and this is, I think, where also DPI helps a lot, is bringing the smaller players on board. So we obviously have, like as Kamya said, the big players, the Googles, the Amazons, the OpenAIs, all of them who have a lot of the power and the compute capability. But it's actually bringing the smaller SMEs on board. And at the heart of all of this is data, right? So we look at DPI as these sort of three main areas with maybe trust services pulled in. But in other countries that we work in, what about things like M-Pesa, which did not start off as a DPI, came from the private sector, but is something that a lot of other players build on top of. And this is something that we're seeing in other countries as well. So it isn't as structured as this. And that being said, I think while DPI has had a nice packaging around it, I think they have all developed sort of individually from each other. And it's been useful that it has been able to sort of connect them, but they have developed individually. And I think the agile approach is also something that I think is very important, that they exist, but they didn't, and they came together and have sort of worked together well, but they didn't start off as being, this is the way that it needed to work in the future.
Thanks. Quick functional question for you. For a large organization like yours, with a huge footprint, do you at the moment have a separate DPI team and a separate AI team?
No, okay, so let me clarify this. So the World Bank, and I'm sure lots of people know, moved from a number of areas from very sort of traditional development roles like agriculture and education to much more newer ones like finance and digital. With AI, because it is very use case driven, we have AI that actually works in a number of different areas of the bank. So the use of AI in agriculture would sit quite firmly within the agriculture team, the use of AI for education. I think where the DPI and the AI team is much more structural and foundational. So what are the key governance standards that we might need to look at for AI? How does the infrastructure, so the data infrastructure work, whether it's connectivity or cloud or hosting or shared services? And so that's where they come together.
Okay. Okay, Jordan, if I could turn to you, you're a relatively new kind of player in the game. If we go by, general funders. When you think about, actually, first maybe we can just roll back let me ask you a question on DPI itself, right? G20 clearly transformative. We've got a consensus, first ever multilateral framework on a suggested pathway forward. We've got a GPAI process, which actually gives you use cases of how do you actually build this stuff. And it's not just an Indian use case. There are some excellent cases from Brazil. There are some excellent cases from Estonia, Philippines, so on and so forth, right? How are you guys thinking about the future of DPI? And are you at all thinking, as a funder, are you thinking around, have you started some thinking around DPI and AI, DPI in AI, and so on and so forth?
It's a great question, and thanks for having me here. So when we think about DPI, we think about a public utility in the digital realm that every country needs to have, and that requires some level of local sovereignty and choice. So in India, many of you may take it for granted that you have something like UPI and Aadhaar. But for example, in the United States, when I needed to renew my passport, I had to send a money order to the US government. Something that seems archaic, but nevertheless, that's where we are, and that's where many countries are. My other panelists have detailed that ID payments and data exchange, maybe things like AI and compute, and potentially even things like open networks fall into this category. We don't have to worry about the definitions, but as we think about expanding access, we can think about that along two vectors. One is that many countries, specifically those in the global south, need access to these capabilities. And so that's something at Co-Develop that we're really focused on, is how do we think about building digital payment systems, digital ID systems in these countries. And the second is to expand access to the last mile to oftentimes marginalized groups who don't have access to things like payments or ID. So AI, coming into this conversation, AI can actually empower a lot of the use cases to make DPI more safe and secure. One area is in digital payments. One of the main proponents of payments globally are credit cards, and they'll often say that digital payment systems like UPI or Pix in Brazil are unsafe and result in a lot of fraud. Now at Co-Develop, we're very bullish on the case for digital payments. We think digital payments has been a great tool for inclusion. But how can we think about incorporating things like scanning technologies that AI has empowered into these digital payment use cases as they roll out, so that things like fraud do not happen? A second use case is for targeting. As we scale social benefits, AI can be used to target the most marginalized groups and send social protection directly to folks' phones. In India, we saw this around the pandemic. And another critical use case is climate change increases the number of natural disasters. Can we use AI to target those groups who are directly affected and either preemptively send payments to help evacuation efforts or send payments to assist with recovery efforts? So those are two areas where I think there's a lot of overlaps where AI can actually empower the DPI use case. But the last thing I might say is that these are two incredibly important technologies, and they need broad civil society participation in the countries in which they are implemented. At Co-Develop, we're very concerned about that and fund many of these civil society groups in the countries that are looking at these questions.
Can I ask you also one functional question? As a big funder in this space, and you've got a lot of other big funders who support you, functionally, what is the one thing that you would require to make sure that there is, as we kind of move the DPI framework to different parts of the world, this is now AI logic, etc., what would spare the wastage of global finance?
So there's many answers to that question, but I think maybe one that we're looking at is thinking about creating what we're calling a holding environment in countries that are deploying DPI systems. How do we create space for civil society to have meaningful consultation, to build trust with the government to actually share insights of groups that may be marginalized, that are excluded from these technologies. That doesn't exist in many countries, and it's a serious concern that we have as countries roll out these incredibly powerful systems.
No, thanks, Jordan. And I'm guessing the other thing that you want is just better coordination, right? I mean, you want Sharmishta to be talking to you almost every week, and you want to be talking to Seattle at the BMGF, etc., right? I mean, it's amazing how functionality can actually matter in this stuff. Sharad is quite keen on the role play, which I'll come to in a second. So I'm just going to do one rapid fire to kind of close some of the thoughts that each one of you have opened out. But as I do that, and then we move to role play, so you have enough time to think about your questions. But I'm keen to kind of involve all of you in your questions, comments, thoughts. But very quickly, if I can maybe just start with Sharad with a very specific question, and very quickly, you know, Kamya talked about, I think the logic makes a lot of sense, right? Is that countries that follow a DPI framework will possibly be able to absorb better AI better, right, in a sense. But at some point, I'm guessing, you know, it's a bit like the argument around the nature of war and the kind of the character of war, right, which is that characteristics change because of technologies, but somehow the nature of a problem doesn't necessarily change. But I wonder in this particular area, as transformative, as fast as AI is, are we looking at certain inflection points where we have to rethink the future framework for DPI?
Look, there's one thing that Kamya mentioned, these are buzzwords here. Don't take them so seriously. This DPI as a word was just invented on September 13th last year. Till then, Tanuj and I called it DPG, right? And DPG, we had to stop calling it DPG because people said it's too broad a term, it's not narrow enough. So on the fly, it was invented. It is an adequate representation of what's happening on the ground, but not a full representation of what is happening on the ground. So my sense is it's ultimately a buzzword. You know, when we start thinking in buzzwords and trying to predict the future, nothing comes out of this. Actually,
no. If I push you on that once, let's forget the buzzwords.
So my sense is, let me do this. I'm going to hijack this for a moment, right? Because I want to bring this to reality. Is there anybody here who does not use Zomato or Swiggy? Everybody does. I see some foreigners here, maybe they don't. But the fact is that I will not mention the specific example, but I'll tell you actual numbers. If you have a dispute, you resolve it using chat. For one of those two companies, that dispute used to cost them 14 rupees to resolve. Because they had customer agents sitting on the other side, they would send you back a chat, resolve it so that you were happy. 14 rupees per incident, right? Today, that costs them 9 rupees per incident. Is it better than before? Yes, because when they use OpenAI on the back end, they're using OpenAI, it so turns out that 69% of those chats are coming from OpenAI, no human involvement at all. So 69% of the disputes are getting resolved without human intervention. Of the remaining 31%, most of it is done by technology. A little bit of it requires human intervention. So their cost, the human cost of resolving those disputes has fallen from 14 rupees to 2 rupees. Now, what does it mean for jobs? Good or bad? Bad. What does that mean? Their actual dispute cost is not 2 rupees, is actually 9 rupees. Because 7 rupees is going to the cloud provider and OpenAI for the technology that they are using. So now when you buy food from your neighborhood store and there is a dispute, 7 of those 14 rupees are shipped away to a foreign country. That is the biggest sucking sound of wealth that you can actually hear ever. It is much worse than when East India Company came here.
No, but I mean, if I can just come in here, see, the customers are also...
You can jump in later. Now...
But Harith, we got to do this quick because I only have 15 minutes.
So now, to solve this problem, we got to use our own models, our own cloud infrastructure. If we have to do that, we got to figure out how to be able to have the data sets necessary to be able to build a world-class model here in India. Right? So now let me take an OpenAI example. I'm going to take.
And you have 30 seconds.
No. I can't do it in. Then let's not do it.
No, because we just want to make sure this is as equitable for everybody.
Do it in 3 minutes. If you want me to do it in 3 minutes, you time me. If it's 30 seconds, let's
Okay,
not.
3 minutes. Let's go.
So I will use you as a OpenAI guy. OpenAI, when they came out with ChatGPT 3, they knew they were using public data. Anybody could have public data and compute and replicate it. In fact, Falcon is a very good example in Dubai where they have done that. Falcon is better than ChatGPT 3 today, right? So therefore they started work on GPT-4, and they said the only way to do GPT-4 is if we ingest into GPT-4 proprietary data sets. So one of the proprietary data sets they ingested is Capital One, which is 35 years of credit card spends in the US. So I'm Capital One, you are OpenAI. You come to me and say, you want my anonymized data set. Will you give it to me? I say, yes. What will you pay me? Pick a number. Do it quickly. You are the one timing me.
10 million.
10 million. Great. I say, great. I'll give it to you. It'll got to be anonymized. You cannot de-anonymize it. Are you okay with that?
Fine.
Yes. If you join this with something else, it will be called deemed de-anonymization. Because I don't want to go and see damage, because if the damage happens and it leaks out, it's a reputational risk. I will die as a company, right? So therefore, if you join this with something else, deemed de-anonymization, that would be bad enough for me to invoke an indemnity. And that indemnity one will be $1 billion. Will you pay me? No. So actually, in this case, OpenAI has actually agreed to that indemnity. You don't have $1 billion. So you go to the money guy and say, the probability of that indemnity being invoked is very low, 500 people. Will you give me an insurance? You get an insurance, you are now back on the table. Then I say, I can do a real-time audit on you to ensure that deemed de-anonymization is not happening. You say yes. Then I say, for that to happen, because even if you keep one incriminating email away, I will not know some damage is happening, so it has to be routed through the US courts as a perjury process called the discovery process. Will you agree to that? You say yes. I will only sign it if it is the New York courts, because the New York courts resolve these asymmetric contracts in weeks, not even in months, because all CDOs in the world fall in that category. That type of asymmetric contract between OpenAI and Capital One, between the training data consumer and training data provider, cannot be done even in Canada, let alone UK or Japan or India. And so therefore, unless you are able to do that, the only two places you have mechanisms to do that is US, and that too only New York courts, and in China, because in 2022 they put a system in place. Europe cannot do it, India cannot do it. If India has to do it through the contractual process, it's not possible because our legal system is not geared for it. So you need a techno-legal approach to make this happen. This is the DPI that you need that will allow you as a local model builder to come to me as Tata Memorial Hospital or any other hospital and say, please give me your anonymized data sets, and I can be ensure that you don't have to worry, no reputational damage, and yet I can build a world-class model in India based on Indian health data. Without that DPI, there is no AI ecosystem in India other than a consuming ecosystem. If India has only a consuming ecosystem of AI, then you will have exactly what I described to you, which is already happening with Swiggy and Zomato. Of course, you can do that for education, you can do that for health, that's a good thing, but it will make somebody else outside India richer. So we have to first and foremost solve the problem of becoming a producing nation of AI, not just a consuming nation of AI. And for that, we need some public technology, public policy, a techno-legal approach to make it happen.
Okay, so there's a lot there, but I'm not sure all our panelists agree with the logic of this. So you've got I don't think anybody will disagree with that we need to produce rather than just consume. I think that's a bench line which comes down to sovereignty, self-reliance, and a range of other stuff, right? But, I mean, Kamya, you wanted to come in. I mean, do you agree with this general logic?
No, I think, see, the biggest issue you'll see is that I'm really unhappy with Swiggy these days because my dispute resolution is crap, right? Because it's some automated thing that comes in, it doesn't actually solve my problem. So I think what ends up happening is the companies that rely exclusively on models that are so generalized that they're not good enough to tailor to solve a specific problem, I think we'll see the downside of it. So I think the reality of consumption of AI, even in India, is going to be augmented consumption, where actually it will help the Hindi speaker who wants to get a job as a Swiggy dispute resolutionist, right, who can translate his intent to solve the problem using a model that will help him translate his voice, right, or a language. So I think what you likely see more of, rather than replacement, I think replacement, is when computers were or calculators were invented, everyone was like, we'll replace accountants, but we haven't, right, because we need people at the end of the day. So I don't think, I don't buy into this theory that AI is going to replace all the jobs. I think what it's actually going to do is going to augment a lot of individuals' capacity. I do agree, though, that the way to scale up AI model production in our own country and in many other developing nations is to ensure that the data needed to train those models is done as an emit, a natural exhaust of existing systems, and not as some expensive recollection of data process, which is what happens. And that's actually, I think, the real power of DPI, because you emit data as part of your natural process. You're not doing some paperwork in the back end that you have to convert into data that's then usable to train models. So that's the biggest value add, I would say.
Look, there are clearly a lot of strands over here, right? There's a labor force question, big tech question, competition question, sovereignty question, capacity capability question, right? We're not going to get through all of that here. But Tanuj, on this capacity capability question, right? If we want to be producers in India and not just consumers, yesterday the Honorable Prime Minister in his keynote for GPAI, I think to the best of my recollection for the first time, put a number. He said India has to be a 25,000 GPU nation, right? So clearly now there is a vision, I'm guessing there's a strategy to be able to access that, but it's going to be hard, right? It's not like you order today and it comes on Amazon tomorrow, to just to irritate Sharad, right? But how do we think through this problem of compute?
I have a 15-minute answer.
So you have about...
I'm kidding.
I'll give you 3 minutes to be fair.
No, it's honestly very simple, right? I think we're very early, right? How many of you think that, okay, we know what we have to do with AI, right? I think we're very, 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 very early, right? So the fact that we use GPU, right, even that to me is indicative of the fact that we really have to step back and, I know GPU is the buzzword these days, but there's already so much work happening, right? The guy, Jonathan Ross, who invented the TPU at Google, has left to start his own company also called Grok, which is making this LPUs, which is language processing units is what we're calling it, which is essentially for inference, right? It's 1/10 the cost and 1/10 the energy requirement for inferencing, right, as a GPU, because it's designed for that, right? It changes the chip architecture completely. And that is currently on the 14 nanometer level, right? Once they reach the 4 nanometer fabrication process and create a new chip, it will be even better. So I think the key thing for me is capacity. Okay, so I want to step back and, Sharad is correct in saying that these are buzzwords. And buzzwords tend to hide the underlying truth, right? You have to strip away the layers and ask what it is. And AI, to me, I like to say, is a lot of math, right? It is a lot of multiplying, to be specific, right? What you multiply is the data. How you multiply it is the model. The multiplier are the chips. What you multiply, real data, synthetic data, we'll figure it out. Some synthetic data has less of the IP problems and all of this that Sharad is even talking about, indemnity problems. How you multiply, today transformer, tomorrow state space models, something else day after. If you remember, the RL, AlphaGo, is why we are on this AI wave in the first place. And that model is forgotten. Multipliers are real value, they're real assets. They're chips, they consume energy, you need to serve data centers, they need power, they need cooling, right? That's where money goes. That's what AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud spend money on, and Microsoft announced $50 billion every year. NVIDIA is $1 trillion company, right? Because of the multipliers. The multiplier architecture is also changing. Government should be creating ecosystems of multipliers rather than specifically purchasing any particular multiplier. That would be my take on this, that today it's GPU, but tomorrow these other chips, for a country that may be a net user of AI rather than a net producer of AI in the short run, may need more inferencing chips than training chips, in which case our model and our strategy must be different. So we should be careful about these things because, we can be late in the game. We've leapfrogged in the past, right? We're the biggest users of internet today, but you aren't the first users of internet, whatever, right? So there's a difference in being first and the difference in being the most, extracting the most value out of it. I think as India, we should step back. We should not get into that chest thumping race. We should think about what makes sense for our people and invest accordingly.
No, thanks. And I guess there's a question whether it's the government that should be setting up these clusters, or are there other ways in which we do this? But I guess the key point you're making is that you don't need to go down the big LLM route necessarily. It's a hard journey anyway. There are other ways in which you can get equitability, right? At the moment, if you look at startups and MSMEs, you're buying on credit, right? That may not be a sustainable way. So Sharmisha, if I can just turn to you, you started the piece on the World Bank by saying is that you guys focus a lot on connectivity. Is there if we take DPI, we take AI, we strip it down to the bottom, right? Which is the ingredient, which is data and multiplication and the various mathematical formulations that Tanuj came up with. Is the bank thinking about cross-border AI clusters? How are you thinking about equitability to even do this stuff on your own? How do you contextualize your own kind of LLMs, no matter what size they are?
Thanks, Rita. So we're not just looking at infrastructure, but we're also to a large extent looking at the governance models, right? So what is the policies that need? And that's where we're looking at a lot of cross-border work. So how should AI standards be interoperable? The word you used earlier, should we democratize AI? Should it be much more on open networks? So we're doing a lot more on the regulation and the governance front as well. And I think we get sort of caught into, and I'll pick up on this thing that everyone's talking about, there are a lot of buzzwords, and I know AI has become really, really important in the last year over ChatGPT and the LLMs that we're seeing, but we have had AI since it's been since the 1950s, since the Dartmouth Conference. We've been talking about AI for a very long time. Yes, the data sources and the amount has changed, the computing capability has changed, but narrow AI in general has been around for a very long time. And while we do talk about AGIs and people like OpenAI and Microsoft are doing some things on AGI, we still haven't got a fully AGI system, which is defined by the Turing test, which is, you get an interpreter to actually say whether a computer sits on the other side, and the computer has to actually fool the interpreter into thinking that they are human or a computer. And I don't think we've ever passed that test yet. So we're still in very, very nascent stages. What we're actually trying to do now is not set regulation. And while there is regulations that's being set up and roadmaps and all of this coming across the world, there are a dime a dozen, what we're really missing is some certain standards. And I know we've talked quite a bit about the India model and what needs to happen here, but a number of the countries that we work in are very sort of low-income countries that need a lot more support and need a lot more on things like the data integrity than potentially countries like India need, which is a little bit more advanced on, say, the technology front. So it's the policy, the politics, and the trust. So giving you an example, yes, the technology is really important, but when we talk about players like AWS, the reason that it works in the countries that we work in, I think especially after the Ukraine war and when the US got Russia off the SWIFT system, most countries that we work with are worried not only about money leaving the country, but that they could be cut off from it from any time. So there is something to be said for countries having their own infrastructure and having their own cloud and computing services, but not all of them should be building it as such, and I think we need to find a different solution where there can be a little bit more of an open source solution to this.
Okay. And just very quickly, Jordan, and then we'll have to take questions from the audience. As a big funder, how do you think about the actual access and equitability question? And further, just on the DPI piece, right? So right now, there's a lot of conversation about DPI deployment and adoption, which is not going to be easy, right? So do you deploy it as the traditional way? You do procurements, data centers, buy land. Sri Lanka has its own kind of DPI. Or perhaps there's an alternative way, which some of us have been working on, which is do you do it as a service? If you do it as a service, you need the cloud. You need the cloud, there are sovereignty questions, for instance. As a funder, in the sense, how do you think about these kinds of problems? Is it, is equitability key to the way in which you're thinking about the future of DPI?
Absolutely. There's a lot of broken practices in the procurement of DPI globally, and countries are approaching this in different ways. So I'll kind of sidestep that question in saying countries all are going through a different process, and we try to follow country demand in terms of what they're looking for, whether they're looking for a proprietary solution, a managed service model, or actually taking something open source and managing it in-house. But on the access question, I want to go back to the Swiggy example, because I think Kamya was onto something, and a similar corollary that you might make is how governments are building their redress mechanisms for something like a digital ID. A government might say, I'd like to reduce my grievance redressal from 14 to 9 rupees, and whether the $7 rupees leaves the country or stays in the country, they're saying, I want that 5 margin, and the result could be quite harmful. It could be that someone loses access to their benefits, and you know, loses the social welfare that makes their life more manageable. So just simply automating the grievance redress mechanisms for critical systems is something that we are quite concerned about at Co-Develop. And the governance of these systems and the assurance that there is some redress mechanism beyond just a digital system is something that is really important.
All right, thanks, Jordan. I think there's lots to unpack. We can keep going. Very quickly, questions. I'm going to ask you to keep it short so we get a good round in. Yes, gentlemen here. I think if there are no mics, just shout out. Yeah, we can hear you.
We can hear you. Repeat your question.
Thank you. My name is Bhavya. I'm from Vadhwani AI. For context, we're a non-profit applied AI institute using AI to solve social good problems. Now, my question is on putting AI and AI products specifically on the pathway to DPI or DPGs, whatever your term of choice is, because the thing is that when you use, let's say, AI models to solve social problems, especially in a country like India, in domains like public health, education, and so on, we've realized that obviously AI is for context-specific problems. Data sets are trained on populations which have certain characteristics, and the entire idea behind a digital public infrastructure is that it is at some level context neutral, you know. Digital payments, for example, identity systems, they are at some level context neutral. So this is an open question, just wanted to sort of get people's thoughts on how we can actually put these targeted, pointed AI products on the pathway to DPGs/DPI. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. We'll come back to that. Yes, gentleman up here. Gentleman over here. So, if you're in the back, you want to ask a question, just raise your hand so I see you. Yeah.
My name is Rohit Israni. I'm the chair of AI standards for the US that participates in ISO and IEC standardization efforts. So I'm going to ask a question about the role play that Sharad mentioned, right? One of the things we did in ISO, and these are AI standards that have been built, 50 countries are participating. The data standards that were being developed got rolled into it. So like data governance and, you know, like for example, the hypothetical contract you mentioned, there could be guidance based on those standards. I think the only thing that could stop the use of data producers would be a legal system, right? So what stops, is your concern because these contracts would not be legally enforceable? Is that the concern?
Okay, so I'm just going to take a third question over here. The gentleman back here, if you could just get a mic, please. Yeah. If you could keep it quite short so that, yeah.
Hi, I'm Sharanjeet, and I'm a hardware and software engineer. I was really happy when Tanuj mentioned that chips are the multipliers that AI runs on. I see a lot of discussions around here on AI and things, but in our environment in India, I haven't seen as much discussion on chips and manufacturing of those. We see a lot of policies happening around UPI and all of those things which are running on those chips. What are the policies or what are the things going on through the government to help those? Because I think as a hardware development thing, capital becomes even more important than a software design.
Okay, thank you. Chip's question, lots actually going on here, but we can unpack that very quickly. Anyone in the back? Okay, last question over here, and then we'll come to the panel. Yes, sir, you.
Thank you. I am Abhishek. I am from IT department of Madhya Pradesh. There I am looking after data analytics and AI vertical. So there we have created some of data science and AI models. The major problem that we are facing there is the quality of data. If we focus on the volume of data, which is a necessary ingredient, because if the volume is less, the accuracy of the resultant model becomes low. If we focus on the volume of data, the accuracy of the quality of data goes down, and accordingly the accuracy of the model is down. If we focus on the quality of data, the volume goes down, and accordingly. Right. So what should be done in this case? And since data is the food on which these models feed, shouldn't there be a national mission for data collection, wherein all the government and private sector make a strong database, and of course the commensurate infrastructure needs to be there, that will be taken care by, but data is my point.
Got it. So we've got 4 questions. We've got about 9 minutes. So you've got about 2 minutes each. And then I do want to kind of come back to Sharath with one question in the end. 4 questions. Should it be context neutral? How do you achieve that? Number 2, standards, guidance. Maybe comes to the techno-legal point that Sharath kind of raised, that Rao's been writing on. 3 is chips. What's going on in India? Can we get this? 4 is chicken and egg problem of quality of data, quantity of data. Yeah. And anything else that you want to add, given the conversations. So. Okay, sure.
So I'll just answer 2 of these. One is related to this, but before I do that, I'll take. Look, for training data sets are multiple types. One is public data. All this GPT-3 and all was public data. Now, of course, there's a nuance there. Is it copyrighted public data? Are you allowed to do that? I'm not going to get into that. But one class is just public data. The second is not public data, but what will go into the integrated or data platform that the government of India is planning to set up, which is government data. It's kind of public data, but with some restrictions. It's not up on the website, but you can use it in some form. And it's available to everybody. Unfortunately, what is happening is that all the good models that are being built on the third class of data, because the first 2 are available to everybody, right? The third one becomes proprietary data. So whoever is able to secure the proprietary data, for example, Copilot for programming, everybody has access to public Gits. But there's only one company in the world that has access to private Gits. So no wonder their Copilot for programmers is better than anybody else's. Because anybody who's out to compete with them, they don't have the third class of data that they need. So ultimately, what the learning that is coming is that the ecosystems, if they have to be winning ecosystems, they'll produce winners on a global basis. They have to be able to unlock the third data set. That becomes very important. Now, this brings me to the point that you are making. To unlock the third data set, since it's proprietary in nature, I have to ensure good behavior of OpenAI. Because if OpenAI behaves well, then I get, remember, $10 million. But if it behaves badly, that $10 million is useless because I am going to go out of business. If he leaks my data, because de-anonymization has become easier than ever before, this is an existential risk for me. So to manage this asymmetrical situation, where in good times I get only $10 million, in bad times I go out of business, do you think I will do that at all? Now I need an arrangement which will ensure, guarantee to me that he will behave properly. In the US, you can guarantee that he'll behave properly if I sign a particular type of contract in New York courts. But if I sign that in Delaware court, I don't have the same guarantee, so I won't sign the contract at all. So that is the peculiar problem that we are dealing with. In China, I can ensure that guarantee. In Europe, I can't do this. In India, I can't do this. So you ought to find a solution to that. Ultimately, what India's solution will be, because it doesn't rely on the court system as such, will work in many other parts of the world as well. That could be codified and turned into a standard and implemented everywhere that you want. Does that answer your question?
Okay, and I should just flag, the book by Rahul Mathan where he kind of really breaks down this techno-legal approach for everybody. But okay, next one, if I could just come to you, Tanuj, of the questions a little bit on context-neutral LLMs, chips, your take.
So, and to sir answer your question also on data missions in the context of what he's asking, right, is that you're trying to solve a task at the end of the day. Now, I understand that our imagination has been captured by the GPT-4s, etc., which seem to be throwing all the data available in the world and compute to build these very large language models. But to actually create stuff that is useful, you're going to have to go to the use case that you have, like Vadvani AI does, and figure out what you need for that, right? So the data mission without a use case in mind, may not be the most sort of valuable idea. And to come back to your question, is that I think there are then therefore some use cases that stay constant across. One of them is the Bhashani mission. It is that we will need to talk to each other as Indians, right? We have some 19,500 languages with more than some 500,000 speakers. So we have to be, and like dialects are infinite, right? So you need to be able to have enough data on that to figure out what people are saying, because then in every app from Swiggy, Zomato, Uber to whatever, and public and apps that I don't even know, AstroTalk, you're going to need them in every language, right? So can you create this base DPI layer of language that then everybody can tap into, etc., right? So that's how you sort of go from not context neutral, I would say, which is, you're right, that's an ideal, but at least you can define the use case more broadly, more horizontally than say medical imaging in a particular area or something like that. So that, I think those as a country we can identify, and there are many, right? Think about this, that our official literacy stats are that 1 in 4 people can't read or write, right? So you need the ability to be able to interact, to even fill a form, right? AI can help people access services with that. So there's a lot to be done that we don't have to sort of, think about, what DPI, what use case, and therefore what to do, and not get so caught up. There's so much simpler stuff, like just Indian names, right? Being able to say that and type it in all their variations and spellings, right? It's a useful model to have and an ability to have that you won't get in your generic.
Then I think just to add, the DPI tools that could maybe power those are, of course, in addition to the data, many sort of AI toolkits that exist, like data tagging, data curation. Platforms like 100x engineers give you a full repository of what are those toolkits, and those end up being in some sense context neutral, but apply to the context of, let's say, filling out a loan application, right? So you have that, the way that we think about it is compute is like a kitchen, right? Then your ingredients are your data, and then your final recipes sort of are your models, right? So if you think about those 3 layers, and I think some of like the work that Pramod, has done, our co-chair with Tanuj, on micro services for compute.
Micro data center.
Yeah,
so
you should come
the open compute cloud. What we're trying to say is
okay, I'm going to cut that for now. There's a paper you can read.
Please read.
But very quickly, Kami, I just want to, quick question. The conversation we're having right here, you deal with Ghana, Togo, Mauritius, large parts of the world as part of CTPI. Very quickly, is this conversation replicated in those geographies? Or is this a very different, very elite conversation starting from a very higher benchmark than the ones that you're having with Nauru or with Fiji, etc.?
See, it's still, in some cases, building AI for one use case, like a chat, right, is something that departments all around the world are exploring. Like we've been talking to the government of Togo, they are building chat-based, AI chatbots for services, right? But the problem is that in those countries where they have less mature DPI, they reach a plateau of how much those can scale, because they don't have other infrastructure that they can pull in to complete the service. Now, chat is one part of the service, interaction, right? But you also need to fetch the document, you need to make a payment, you need to complete the transaction. For all of these, if you don't have DPI, then it becomes, it doesn't scale at that level. So to some extent, of course, they're dealing with connectivity gaps, they're dealing with lack of other DPI building blocks. So yes, I would say this is more of a slightly more advanced conversation, but they are also not that far behind. These countries, 50 countries around the world are building DPI as we speak. So I think this is going to change really fast, as we scale.
And Sharmishta, as the speed of DPI kind of, takes 50 countries, 100 countries, etc., you brought up the point about governance. Very quick take, where do we locate this conversation on governance? Sharat sits on a very exclusive group in the UN. There's a UN GDC process. There's universal safeguards process on DPI. You've got something at the World Bank. How do we find meaning in these different conversations and tracks?
I actually want to bring up a conversation that Sharat and I were actually having before this, which was something that we've taken from the financial sector as well, is that there isn't a certain body that actually sets out these are the regulations or these are what everyone should follow, but they more likely set out standards. So if you know the FATF, which is the Financial Action Task Force, they set out all of these standards for AML CFT, but none of them are actually required by countries to follow, but countries follow them. So there's some amount of, I think what we're talking about, like societal pressure and institutional isomorphism that gets these countries to follow this. And I think this is something like a similar model that we can actually follow in AI as well.
Okay, and lastly, Jordan, I'm hoping that this conversation has given you a lot more to fund, right? Yes or no, you can answer later, but any concluding thoughts from you?
No, just that, you know, there's, as Kamya said, a lot of countries are rolling this out, and there's a lot of learnings that can come from far-flung places all around the world. Co-Develop has been working with the UN, UNDP, and the UN Tech Envoy to develop a universal safeguards for digital public infrastructure initiative. We hope that to be a set of learnings from around the world and useful even to places like India that have already become, you know, come quite a long ways on their journey. So we'll look forward to your engagement on that.
Thanks, Jordan. And just last couple of minutes, if I can just bring it back to Sharad. Sharad, you know, lots has happened just in the last 12 months. This is not new. Journey started 2009 for us, 2003 for Singapore, so on and so forth. But 12 months has been quite a mobilizer, right? Let's just forget the buzzword of DPI, but now it stands for something, and that grammar is important. You know, you've got commitments of 50 and 5, UN 100 by 2030, so on and so forth. What do you see as the future of DPI?
No, obviously it's very bright, but DPI has reached a point where it has to be reinvented. See, the biggest attraction for DPI was it prevents digital colonization, right? That was the motivator for India, and that's the motivator for many other countries in Global South. They don't want to be colonized by either a country or by a set of companies. Is that true, right? All the good work that India has done will come to naught if AI colonization happens. It's as simple as that. Now the point is that not every country in Global South will be able to fight AI colonization. But India, because it has continental data sets available, it has talent available, it can procure compute, right? And it can create a local ecosystem for consumption in many places that we are talking about, has a chance to have a different type of an AI ecosystem where many players, fireflies are lighting up the sky. There are not just 7 or 10 companies in the world that control AI in the future, right? That is the vision that we have to create. For that vision, every ounce of strength that we have accumulated in the last 13 years will have to be redeployed from first principle basis to make it happen. Now, what does it mean in practice? It means that for compute, which is a completely driven by market mechanism, we have to supplement it by non-market mechanisms. The proprietary data sets, data which is completely controlled by government making the data available or public data, we have to bring in market elements to India because that is where the next wave of data elements are. We have to bring that in the context where it's safe to bring market in India, which was not going to be the case earlier. When it comes to talent, we have to recursively use AI to create the best talent in AI that we need. AI producing AI talent. In regulatory infrastructure, as something that you talked about, we have to create a regulatory infrastructure in India which is best in class. So that because every country which has managed to become a tech power, other than the US, which invested in public technology because of Vannevar Bush in a way no other country did, but after that, Japan, they had benefit of tech transfer from the US. Korea, tech transfer from the US. Israel, the Russian immigrants coming in 2008. China stealing the tech, sorry, I have to say that. But India cannot do the China model. And there is no way the US is going to give us tech transfer because it's not in their interest to do that. So we have to create a regulatory infrastructure where the best people in that tech who happen to be of Indian origin are willing to come back like me and others like Pramod to come and live in India again. We did that 13, 14 years ago. We need the next wave of people to come, and that will depend on the regulatory infrastructure that we create here that allows everything else to be combined, so that there is a national campaign of saying we will be an AI producing power, not just an AI consuming power. That is what is the challenge in front of us.
I almost feel that we should have started with this question. There are two types of panels, the one that you can't wait for it to be over, and there's one that actually just spurs at least 5 other panels. I think this is definitely the latter and more. But thank you so much to our panelists, thank you to our organizers, GPAI, and thank you to all our audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rudra.